What's going on? You're here with Nate28 and this is Crossbeats production. So in this video I want to show you guys how I get color or color adoration in my tracks, especially when it comes to mastering and just working around the track and things like that. So in this particular video I want to first bring to your attention the purpose of adding color to tracks. When it comes to mastering in general, sometimes you don't really need to do a whole lot to a track, and sometimes it just is really good how it is. And this track was almost one of those examples where it kind of basically came to me. I heard the track, listened to it, analyzed it, and thought about the things that I needed to do and thought about the things that I need to leave alone. Mastering really, a lot of the time, is really just listening to the track and just taking in what the artist's perspective is on the track and trying to leave that alone as much as possible. Sometimes you can alter things, sometimes you can't. Sometimes, I guess when you get sent stuff, they have a sound in their head and you have a sound in your head, and you kind of got to go between the two and kind of make those things come together. Really, it's not about you, it's about the artist, and it's about what they want their music to sound like when it goes out to the world. So, in essence, this whole mastering process that I've used on this track, I just want to show you a few steps about it, and I'll quickly go through all the plugins I've put on it because they all do colorize the track in a way or a fashion, and I'll just explain to you the process. So as you can see here, I've got a meter. This is my meter that I normally would use to master my tracks, and it kind of gives me a gauge of where my loudness levels are at, where my spectral meter is showing me if it's in phase, things like that. Also the actual EQ and showing me where EQ is sitting in the track in the mastering process. So generally what I would do to play around with this is just go through all the metering and stuff, obviously see how that's progressing throughout the mastering process. One thing I want to bring to your attention, if you can see this here in the red, I usually meter at minus 16 LUF. And that's because usually with iTunes and places like that, that's the level that they usually maximize their volume to. So if you send something that's louder than minus 16, they usually turn down the track so it suits the minus 16. With iTunes, I think a couple other places do it as well. As you can see, this is kind of red over that level, and I'm not too worried about it because, I mean, at the end of the day, iTunes isn't the only place this track's going to be heard. It will be heard on other platforms such as Radeon and other things like that. So, I mean, it's just something to take into consideration when you're mastering a track because, when you send it out, you want things to sound like they did when you left it, not altered and changed. But, I mean, you can never impress every single platform that the track's going to go to. But anyway, that's something I want to just quickly bring to your attention. So, platform is one thing, okay, so that's out of the way. So the next thing is the plugin chain that I've got here. So I'll just show you an order in which that I've got them on, and I'll just show you and explain to you why I did it and give you an understanding of this. First off, I'll play the track to you in a snippet of the track. I don't want to give too much away because this is not released at this stage, and this track is by Gabrielle Brie, which is, I think she's going to be probably pretty high up there in the artist. I really think her voice is fantastic, and I really like the track. So anyway, I'll play a section of the track and you guys can hear it, and then I'll turn off all the plugins, I'll turn them on, and then I'll explain the process behind that. So let me play this quick snippet of the track.
Looking for anything serious, I don't wanna hear that. I'm not gonna be oblivious, be another doormat. I've spent so many of my tears over the balcony.
Okay, so as you could hear with the track, sounds really good. The vocals sound nice and crisp. Everything sits right in the mix, and everything kind of came to me in a degree where it was almost ready to go. I liked the track when I first heard it, and usually when I first listen to music, I usually analyze it. I analyze all the instruments. I think about where they should be sitting in the mix and things like that, and then that's how I would approach the mastering process, from knowing where the things should sit. If there's things out of place, obviously they need to be fixed in the mix, and that's not something for mastering, but it's good to listen to all of those aspects of the track and trying to analyze things that sit there in the mix, and and sort of gauge where you can sort of play with the track and where you can't, because some things you might get that you just can't do anything with, and that's something that either the artists can change it in the mix, or otherwise they accept it how they sent it to you and they know that, and you just work around it the best you can. So first off, one of those things that I'm talking about is the high-end frequencies of this track. When I first got it, I'll just play the plugins without it, and I'll just show you what I'm talking about. So this part here, especially with the voice where it sort of screams out, I'll play that in a second. Just let me play this right now. Okay, so as you can hear, it's quite high in the high-end frequencies on that part of the track. Now along here, it's not too bad. I mean, in that section of the track, it really kind of suits it. But what I did was to attain some of those sibilances and that really harsh stuff at the top. I set up a de-esser on the real top end stuff of the track, and what I did was solid out some of the S's there. So I'll just quickly play this to you. So as you can hear, most of the top end stuff is in this section here from 3 to 6 or 18K. Now that's kind of just removing a lot of the sibilances, the real harsh stuff that's in the mix. And I mean, it could have been a little bit less, but I really felt that this suited the track and it made everything else stick up really clearly in the mix after I did the de-essing. So quick settings that I did on the de-essing as well. The attack is really fast, so as fast as I could possibly get it almost, at 0.02 milliseconds. And the release is at 19 milliseconds. So how did I come up with that attack and the release settings? So basically what I did, and I've shown this on other videos on my my channel here. Just quickly get rid of that. Where is it? So basically what I did was I went to BPM delay calculator, and I use any of these. It doesn't really matter. Whatever one tells you the information you need. I know the BPM of the track is 95, so I type that in. And then once I get the notes and the delay on the milliseconds, then I work out, okay, this is 1 of 1/28, and that's 19 milliseconds. So it's quite a fast release to release the attack that I first put on there. So what I'm talking about is, you know, when you're looking at the transients that come through, the transients are really being grabbed almost immediately, which takes out the harshness of the sibilances. But I'm allowing it to restore as fast as possible so it doesn't lose that the rest of the sound that goes through it. So basically it just really quickly grabs the transients and then releases them really fast. So that's basically that de-esser right there. That's the de-esser, and that's all I used it for, really. I mean, if you got any other de-esser, you can use that within Studio One. If you have a Waves de-esser or whatever it is that you've got, you can use that. That works perfectly okay. Next thing on the plugin chain was the Neutron plugin, and I basically only used this to pretty much just use the compressor, which is like a kind of like a dynamic EQ basically, but it compresses out some of the signal, and I set up a similar kind of setup like a de-esser on that in that regard, and all I did was take out about -5 dB on that, and I set that so it was just touching the peak when it went over it. Basically just like this. So as you can see, the little gauge there, it just moves a tiny bit, reduces it by 5 dB when it goes over the threshold. Next thing here was this EQ, which is not dynamic, it's just a normal EQ. Then it dips out some of that 1655 hertz. And then I've got another one which is at 655 hertz. And it's pretty much another compressor or dynamic EQ, and again it's doing the same kind of thing. It's reducing 8 dB in kind of that honky mid-range stuff there. So that's all that really does. So pretty much that's all I used it for, and that's the rest of these are just all turned off, these modules. I didn't need them, and that's in the stereo EQ. Actually, if Isotope are watching this video, hopefully you guys at some point, maybe you look at my videos, I don't know, I'm just guessing. But anyway, if you guys do, I'd love to have this as a mid-side function on this EQ. It would really be beneficial to do that. I mean, there's other EQs, obviously, they use the mastering one that you can get, which is Ozone 7, 6, or whatever you want to do. They've got a well, I think 6 and 7 have the dynamic EQ, which you could use that as well. Next thing here is the oxide tape. And this is a fantastic plugin if you want to get some real deep bass low end stuff, which tape seems to give you on some settings. This tape emulation, it's not really a specific tape emulation like a mastering one or anything like that, but it really works well for mastering if you use it in the right way. So what I did was, I'll just play it without it quickly.
I've spent so many of my tears.
Okay, I'll play it with it.
I've spent so many of my tears over the balcony.
So as you could hear on the kick and the lower bass kind of register, it gave a bit of oomph to that and just more thickness to the bass and the kick. All I did here was the settings was 15 IPS, and I left it on the EQ setting of the NAB setting there, and just noise reduction is on. And basically what I did to make sure it didn't hit the tape too hard was I reduced the input and then I increased the output. So usually if it's at 0 here, it's pretty much hitting the tape at 0 dB, because this track at the start was almost clipping as it was anyway. So that's how you kind of can use the tape without, you know, getting too much of that tape saturation sound. And it's on the repo mode, which just allows it to have that different kind of sound. That's it. So that's a tape plugin that I use there. And you don't have to use tape for mastering by any means. It just, sometimes you just want that extra coloration on the sound and the thickness in the bass, and that tape emulation does that quite well. So next plugin on the chain was my EQ. So this removes out a fair bit of the side stuff. So this is on the side setting, so mid-side, as I was talking about before. If you guys aren't familiar with mid-side processing, all that really is basically the mid is your mono channel, and the sides is the stereo information on both left and right, without the mono, basically. So that's all that mid-side is, and it always used to boggle my mind when I when I first started figuring out EQs and stuff like that. It boggled my mind a lot about what's this mid-side stuff and what are they talking about. So that's pretty much all it is. So just think mid as your mono channel and sides as your stereo left and right without the mono, basically the side information. So anything that's on the sides, that is the sides, and anything in the center is the mono channel. So what I do usually with most of my mastering is, well, not every time, but generally I try and remove some of this low end stuff out. And the reason why I do that is so the kick in the center channel, so the mid or the mono, can come through and it's not affected by any of the sides. So that's pretty much what I've done here. Excuse me. What I've done is used a low shelf, removed out minus 5.9 dB, 100 hertz, and that's the kind of the tilt or the angle on that shelf that I've got. Next thing, that's not actually plugged on, turned on, I mean. So the next thing here is that's not on. The EQ, which removes out some of this 1.5 dB at 4.5 kilohertz. And then I've got a resonant filter, which this is kind of cool because these are very handy sometimes to get the resonant kind of sound that you want. Whereas you can dip out some of the, say for example on this occasion I'm dipping out the top end, and it leaves some of the rest there using that resonant kind of filter shape. So if I could zoom in, which I can't, but if I could zoom in on this, if you could see it, it has like kind of a resonant sort of shape like you can see here. It sort of curves up like that, and it kind of curves around. So that's a kind of trick that you can use to get rid of some of that real harsh high-end stuff that you don't really need. And a lot of my mastering, I tend to do that because I feel like people just seem to mix really harsh in the digital audio realm, whereas in analog they didn't do that as much. Well, I didn't hear it as much, and especially when it was in, you know, record or tape time. With records, they just couldn't put that much top harsh stuff in there, so they had to cut it away, and that was what they used the cutting lathe for, to do that. So they had compressors and cutting lathes and things like that to get rid of the harsh stuff on the real high end stuff, and also on the low end stuff, so it fitted on the record. It just wouldn't, the needle wouldn't write properly if it wasn't correctly done with the EQ. So anyway, I just like the way that sounds. I guess I grew up in the age of when records were out and tape was out, so I heard that sound and I really like that flavor that it has. So I kind of try and emulate that sort of stuff when I do my mastering anyway. So anyway, so the low end, as you can see there, remove that. Top end stuff, remove that out a bit. In the middle channel, I've done some interesting stuff here. I've removed some of the sort of mid sort of stuff, which is at 680 at minus 0.4 dB. Really not much, but just enough to make it sound better. And I increased some of that at the 10K mark, which is kind of strange because most of the time 10K has a lot of sibilances, and that's kind of where you get rid of these sibilances. But because I've reduced some stuff with other things, you know, the de-esser removed some of the sibilances out for me already, I could actually boost some of this at the 10K area. So that's what I did. I used a bell curve, and I just increased some of the dB there. The next thing that I did was 11, and I've reduced some, so reduced at minus 0.7 at 11.4. So again, you know, you can use like kind of like that that filtering of a Pultec kind of EQ style type filtering, where you can, you know, reduce some and increase some, or reduce some at the back and increase some at the front. Either way, it's just little tricks that you pick up along the way, and that's kind of what I did there, just so you can see it. So again, minus at 10. So as you can see, this is like 10.1 and then 1 at 10. So I'm increasing some, removing some, just like that Pultec kind of style of EQ. And I'm using a shelf, which is the Baxendale, which is similar to the Pultec anyway. This sort of kind of same way that works. Next thing here was the low end, which I reduced out anything below 30 hertz at a 12 slope filter there. So 12 dB per octave. So that's the EQ. Sorry I'm going on a lot, but I just wanted to kind of explain to you these processes so you guys could see it and just go through all that. So let me play it with it on there.
I've spilled so many of my tears over.
Play it without.
I've spilled so many of my tears over the balcony, and I will never again.
So it kind of just adds an extra smoothness to the track, just really cleans it up a bit and makes it sound a little bit better. Okay, so this is what I was talking about with colorization of your sound and, you know, trying to work on tracks in that regard of, you know, for example, this track was created pretty much, as far as I'm aware, all in a digital realm. So there's a lot of stuff that you just don't get when you create in digital versus analog, and most of that stuff is the coloration of the sound. So your analog gear would create color in the sounds. Different pieces of gear will have different color on the sounds as well. And that's where you can make stuff up in the digital audio realm if you have plugins that emulate that sort of stuff. And that's what I want to show you here. So first thing I put on was this nice little compressor, which is the UAD Fairchild 670. Now this is the old kind of tubes compressor that you would have gotten in the, you know, studios, for example, Ocean Wave and things like that. So they emulated this, I think, from the Ocean Wave studio, which is the Fairchild compressor, the 670 model. So all I used this for pretty much was just to get the color off the compressor, and I basically left it at 0 input, which is just the input that's coming in, and I left it at 0 output, which is the output going out. I left the mix as it was, and I just made this sidechain filter just a little bit higher off from the real bass end stuff, so I didn't pick up that, because I didn't want it to compress. I really just wanted it to color the track, and that's all it did. So I'll play it without it, and then I'll play it with it.
I've spilled so many of my tears over the balcony.
Okay, let's play it with it.
I've spilled so many of my tears over the balcony.
Okay, as you can see, the needle doesn't move. It's not compressing, and that's the whole point of just using gear like this to color your sound. It's more or less why I wanted to show you this tutorial, because when it comes down to mastering, like I said before, it's got a lot to do with just adding flavor to your tracks and adding color to your tracks as well. So at this stage, what I might do is turn on the limiter, because it's getting pretty close to peaking at 0 dB on my metering here. So I'll just move this up so you guys can see that. So let's just get with this this limiter here. I'll turn that on and I'll show you the sound difference that it creates, because adding limiters obviously do alter your sound, especially when it hits your transients with the peaks of your transients and things like that. It's more or less cutting off the real top end peaks of the transients and allowing everything else to come up in volume basically. So I'll just turn this on, I'll show you the with and without, and we'll just go through that.
I've spilled so many of my tears over the balcony.
Okay, without it.
I've spilled so many of my tears over the balcony.
Okay, so as you could hear, it just adds that little extra bit of volume only by a slight amount, but that's kind of what I was going for when I put that on there. Now, before I explain the rest of these plugins, I just wanted to show you what's going on over here. So I've got a imager which is just allowing me to get everything in phase. I'll just turn that on, and I'll turn this imager on as well. So basically all they're doing is low end stuff, sub stuff. I'm just putting all of that into mono. So I've got everything below 89 hertz is going into all mono, and that's allowing everything below that be in phase. Now, the reason why I did that when I first received the track, I had bass that was all over the place in the lower spectrum, so anything below 89, and there was stuff all over the place, because the synths that are in this track, they're just really wide, and that's the way it was created. But when you get it into clubs or any loudspeaker for a concert or things like that, it's going to blow those out if you don't have everything in mono, especially if they're really loud as well. So that's the reason for that. The next thing here just creates a little bit of stereo field in the lower mid register there. Everything again in mono, so it made sure that it goes back into mono after I create this bit of stereo stuff. Because as you can see, the band's kind of spread to the lower register as well. Things here at the top, more in mono than it was in stereo, so I reduced it by 3.3, and I left that as it was. So let me just play that quickly with it on there.
I've spilled so many of my tears over the balcony.
Alright, awesome. So that's pretty much just allowing everything, like I said, to be correctly in phase, and you'll see it on this meter here from now on. Everything's in phase, and it always stays above this marker here. So the next piece of gear that I put on here is my all-time favorite compressor, probably in all time, as I suggested. And this compressor is the Elysia Mastering Alpha compressor, so Alpha Master, basically. I really like this compressor, and there's another compressor that I like almost as much as this one, which is by Better Maker Music, and it's actually a hardware unit as well. I haven't got my hands on it yet, but I do plan to do that in the near distant future at some stage. But the reason why I like the Better Maker and this, so the Better Maker 502V, I think it is, and this mastering compressor is because you can alter the way that the stereo field is in the mix, and you can alter the mid-side channels. So it basically allows you to link either mid-side or unlink them. And in both of those compressors, more or less, this one is probably the one I'd like to have as the hardware unit, but it's 10 grand later. But anyway, this unit, it looks scary. It really isn't though. It's actually really easy to use, and it basically is just like any other compressor when you get to use it as well. So pretty much threshold here, attack here, release here, ratio here, and I haven't really done a whole lot. All I've done is add some coloration again, and this compressor is fantastic for just doing all sorts of stuff, but especially for mastering, it works really well. So let me play it with it on there, and then I'll play it without it, and actually I'll play it the other way around, so without first and then with it on there.
I've spilled so many of my tears over the balcony, and I will never again.
Okay, with it on there.
I've spilled so many of my tears over the balcony, and I will never again.
Alrighty, so it wasn't really compressing much. I was just touching the needle at 1, and also touching the needle, well, it doesn't have a needle, but the dial here, so the register at 1 on both the the mono channel and the stereo channel there. So as I said to you before, I've got this unlinked, and this side here, the left side, is all mono, and all of this side here on the right is all my stereo information. So the best part about this is you can use this soft clip mode to kind of control the peaks of your transients and just basically limit without increasing volume. So it basically clips the level, so it clips it to a certain level, creating like a ceiling, and then it doesn't allow anything past that. The next thing here is the gain. So I've just increased the gain by a slight amount. but on the stereo information, I've increased the gain by 2 dB. So what that did was it allowed my stereo field to become a little bit wider, and it pushed the mono a bit further down. And also the way that it did that was creating a little bit of compression in the mono channel, more so in the mono than it was in the stereo. So it hardly ever grabs the stereo channel, so it hardly ever compresses that, and it mainly compresses the mono. So that's a little trick that you can use to create wider stereo fields and push the mono channel down just a slight amount, and increase the stereo kind of field on your track to make it sound like it's a wider track and make it sound more depth to the track. It's definitely a key that you can use to create depth in your tracks. And I learnt this technique because I was listening to compressors on how, especially with analog gear, how they create a depth in the mix. And there was a compressor, like I said to you before, the Better Maker compressor that I was listening to, and there's a YouTube video that's on there by Mixbus TV. He did a comparison, good comparison on comparisons, but I don't know if the tracks are all the best ones I would have used, but anyway. So listening to his comparison, I was listening to the track, and I was listening to how the compressor affected the depth of field and how analog gear creates depth of field anyway. But especially when it went to mid-side mode, this compressor is designed for this as well. But when I was listening to that compressor, I heard how the mid-channel kind of just sat in the mix, and it wasn't annoying to your ears anymore, but the sides came out and it just sounded like this really fantastic sound. And I was like, now I understand why some analog gear creates that depth, because it just alters the way the stereo and the mono channels sit, especially if it's a stereo compressor or a dual mono or things like that. Not so much if it's mono, because obviously it's only got one channel. But anyway, so that's how I kind of gathered the information. I used it on this compressor, and it really gave me that depth of field that I was looking for that you get out of analog gear. So that's one thing, okay? So this is just a tape emulation that I've got in here, which I've disabled. As you can see, it's all disabled. There's nothing going on there. So I was just playing around with it, putting it on and off. Whether or not I liked it, then I didn't, and in the end, like it. So the next thing here is the Isotope Vintage EQ, which I've got that set up in an interesting way as well. So basically I've reduced some of that 10K again. So as you can see from before when I boosted it, now I'm reducing it. So different style of EQ though, so it makes it sound a little bit different. Next thing was a low cut here at 100. So 0.1 dB of a low cut at 100. So it's really hardly anything at all. This really is an interesting kind of EQ because it does cut things interestingly in the way it does it. So as you can see, this kind of curve that's going on, really minimal sort of curve there. I'll just zoom in so I can show you. So basically the curve removes some of that mid stuff out, increase some of the top to kind of get that real flavor of the vocal come out a bit, reduce some of the 10K, and reduce some of the 100 hertz there. So that's all that's really doing, just giving my track a bit of flavor. We'll just turn that on and play the track.
I've spilled so many of my tears over the balcony.
Turn it off.
I've spilled so many of my tears over the balcony.
Turn it back on.
I've spilled so many of my tears over the balcony.
Awesome. That's all that's doing. Really very minimal information going on there. Next thing is another flavor adder. So this is the Pultec or ProTech, however you want to look at it. So this is the Pultec version of it. So UAD created this plugin. It's an interesting plugin when you just put it on your mix and you don't touch anything. It still adds flavor, and that's what I love about this EQ. I don't generally do a whole lot of EQ with this EQ because sometimes it's just not appropriate for the stuff you need to use it for. It might be for some stuff, you know, older classic kind of records, but in this instance, I didn't need to use it for anything. I don't want to boost anything, don't want to cut anything on that regard. Let me play it without it, and then we'll play it with it.
I've spilled so many of my tears over the balcony, and I will never again. I've spilled so many of my tears over the balcony, and I will never again.
So it's hard to pick it up if you're not kind of trained to listen for this stuff, but it adds harmonics to the track, and I can hear it, especially with the low end where you can hear the synth and things like that. It just adds that harmonic information, and even with the top end stuff, it just makes it a little bit smoother. It's hard to explain, but if you use this in your own mixes, if you have this plugin, you have to have obviously a UAD hardware unit to use it, and work around it with that. But if you guys have UAD, try it out. You don't have to have UAD to use EQs like this. Waves created one as well. I don't know if it sounds as good or not because I've got it as well. I did a comparison video on them before, but so Waves created one that's very similar. Where is it? This one, this PokeTech here. So actually I might just chuck it on there to see what it does. So let me just turn it off.
I've spilled so many of my tears over the
Turn it on.
I've spilled so many of my tears over the balcony.
Yeah, it kind of adds some flavor to it. I don't know. Anyway, so if you guys have the Waves version of it, try that out. It might give you some sound that you're after. So the next thing was a UAD SSLG bus compressor with basically no reduction, just the flavor again of this, and I set it to 4 ratio, but I'm not really compressing, so it doesn't really matter what ratio it's set on, to be honest. But you know, with the compressor behind the scenes, it would have a slope on the knee there, so that slope would create compression as the signal increases. So, you know, it may affect the way the audio sounds, it may not, depending on the peaks and how they're hitting that compressor as well. But adding the flavor, I'll just play it without it, and then I'll play it with it.
I've spilled so many of my tears over the balcony, and I will never again. I've spilled so many of my tears over the balcony, and I will never again.
So if you guys pick it up, like I can hear it in my studio, it has, only because I know the plugin really well, it has this SSL sound that, I don't know if it's the actual SSL desk sound or not, but it just has that sound that I remember from listening to other SSL consoles. So when I put it on there, all I was really listening for was depth of field, tonal quality, and you know, just that sound that the SSL has. And I kind of got that just by putting it on there, and it gave me the sound that I was after, so I left it on there, and that was suitable for the track. So next final thing here is a vintage limiter. Now this is to control the peaks. I've got the ceiling set at 0.3 and the character at 4. Then I've got this threshold set here at minus 0.1 dB, so I'm not getting too much increasing in volume, and it's on analog settings there. So usually what I'll do is especially with tracks like this where there's a lot of volume and there's a lot of loudness going on with the track, I'll normally put maybe 1 or 2 limiters on that track to control the transients in concession, you know, so it's not just hitting one limiter and that limiter's having to do all the work. The same thing applies when it comes to using compressors. You can put multiple compressors on a track, so you can use one compressor to do a small amount, the next one to do another amount, and so on and so forth. And that allows you to not have to put all the hard work onto one compressor. So I also learned this technique through listening to other people's mastering and other people's techniques on mastering, and I tried it on my own, and you know, funnily enough, it works fantastic. So I've been doing this stuff for like 6 years now, so you know, you pick up things along the way, and it's just something I wanted to share with you guys, so you guys might, you know, learn out of it. So as I said there, I'll just play it without it.
I've spilled so many of my tears over the balcony, and I will never again.
With it on.
I've spilled so many of my tears over the balcony, and I will never again.
So it's just more or less controlling the peaks here. As you can see on that meter, it's just basically hitting the top of the peak, and that's it. So this is pretty much the entire mastering chain that I've got in this track, and it gives you an example of what you can do with your own stuff, even at home if you're just trying to learn how to do mastering in your own stuff. What I would thoroughly recommend though is make sure you get your mix to sound how you want that to sound without ever touching any mastering plugins on it. So the best thing is to learn how to get your mix to sound as good as you want it to sound, like, you know, almost 99% there, because mastering isn't about getting the mix to sound different. Like I said in the start of this video, I said it's about getting the flavor on the track. It's about giving it uniqueness. It's about creating depth of field. It's more or less getting it ready so it's in submission so it can go out and be played in the world, basically. So that's why I pointed out to you this meter here at the start, because like I said before, if you're using iTunes or you're using other platforms, they're going to have their own techniques of turning down the volume on your track. So if you're not in their, you know, their lineup of what the dB ratio should be for the iTunes or whatever, you're going to have your track affected by them. So just bear that in mind when you're looking at making your track really loud. There are measurements that are out there now that people like iTunes or other places, CD Baby even, you know, could be anything, any downloadable platform, they might have their own volume level, and you can go online and check out their levels that they use as a peak level, and just kind of work around that, because, you know, bearing in mind your track is how it is here, but when it gets out to the world, it might sound different. So I just wanted to show you these tips, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, remember to like the video and give me a subscription as well, and also remember to comment in the channel as well, and share anything that you guys want to comment about this video. Really appreciate it, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and peace.